If there's one thing that defines humanity, it's persistence. Just look how far it got us. And there's no better illustration of human persistence than communication. Throughout history, humankind has strived for better, more efficient communication against all odds. That's why today you can connect with anyone, anywhere in the world with just one click of a button. But do you know how humanity went from gestures and sounds to such sophisticated communication? Today we're explaining exactly that by taking a stroll down memory lane, and we're starting all the way back at the very beginning of humankind. Let's travel through time, shall we? The year is 7 million BCE, and the hottest entities in town looked something like this. Well, town is a strong word, of course. They had dwellings at best, but their accommodations aren't as interesting to us as their communication. 7 million years ago, our ancestors communicated mostly through gestures, facial expressions, and other non-verbal cues. They had a good go at it for around 6 or so million years before they developed the ability to vocalize. Thus, speech was born. However, it was quite rudimentary. While our ancestors developed vocalization around 100,000 BCE, it took them a while to turn it into a pattern, to assign specific sounds to things, thoughts, and ideas. That, otherwise known as coherent speech, came much later. Just because our ancestors took their time developing actual speech patterns doesn't mean they were sitting on their hands doing nothing. Although, maybe they did. Who knows what their day-to-day looked like aside from hunting for food and fending off predators. But my point is that although speech and language were still developing, that doesn't mean our ancestors didn't know how to express themselves. Does this look familiar? Cave paintings were the ideal way for our distant ancestors to transfer knowledge, share ideas, and leave warnings for future generations. Of course, they probably had other ways of expressing themselves. We know for a fact they used rocks and other formations to carve into as well. However, since they were so protected, cave paintings remain the most long-lived testament of early communication. Some of them are 51,200 years old. Talk about a long shelf life. Let's jump ahead in time real quick. So we had cave paintings for tens of thousands of years. Meanwhile, our ancestors were busy developing civilization and, with it, communication. Around the time the first cave paintings came to life, so did language. Early humans were quick to combine sounds to specific vocalizations that will denote objects otherwise known as words. But it wasn't until 3500 BCE that they started developing another vital part of communication, written language. Gradually, over thousands of years, our ancestors developed their own systems of symbols and characters that represent sounds and words. Thus, written language was born. After nailing nonverbal and oral communication, it was time for humans to move on to written communication. Now, there's an ongoing debate about which civilization was the first to develop its own writing system. One school of thought is that the fertile shores of the Nile bore more than just grain and fruit. They were also the birthplace of the first written language. Others, however, are adamant that the first language was born in Sumeria, or even in the Indus Valley in today's India. The truth is that all these civilizations probably developed writing systems practically simultaneously. All three civilizations, and many more that we probably don't know about, developed their writing systems so they could communicate asynchronously on clay tablets. I think that says, all hands meeting at the Euphrates at sunrise. All no-shows must provide a note from the healer. I guess they really were advanced for their time. I kid, of course, but the truth is that clay tablets were used for all communication. Sumerians even used them to make invoices and track transactions, for example. Okay, so far our protagonists, the humankind, have mastered nonverbal, verbal, and written communication. What's left to cover, you ask? Well, we didn't go from clay tablets to video calls on Bumble in one step, so we have to cover all the innovations that happened in between. If you allow us another huge leap forward into time, let's take a look at the 15th century. Imagine the following. The year is 1439, and you're but a humble scribe. Your job is to write books, not your own, but to transcribe all the books in the library you work for, to make copies that people can read. It's painstaking work, and you've already developed carpal tunnel because of it. Not that you know what carpal tunnel is in the 15th century, but hey, someone has to do it, right? Well, not for long. In 1440, goldsmith Johannes Gutenberg invents the printing press, rendering your work obsolete and starting the printing revolution in the process. Thanks to Gutenberg and his invention, people were able to produce books more quickly, efficiently, and most importantly, affordably. That meant that books were no longer a luxury they were during medieval times, and more people can afford them. Knowledge became more accessible, and because knowledge is power, we've entered the age of prosperity as humankind. Eventually, the printing revolution led to advancements in science, larger production of now world-famous literature, and the invention of the first printed newspapers in the 17th century. After the printing revolution started, technology and along with it, communication started developing rather quickly, so keep up. In March of 1876, Alexander Graham Bell marched, pardon the pun, into the US Patent and Trademark Office. His mission: to claim an invention that allows people to transfer their voices in real time from one device to another over great distances. It wasn't long after his invention that people started not only using but installing telephones in their homes. Soon after, the telephone became the new it thing, especially when technology evolved enough to allow for intercontinental communication. That was in 1927, by the way. So, as you probably already knew, we have Bell to thank for being constantly available to other people, thanks to the little rectangles we carry with us everywhere. But our phones are quite different from those that Bell used back in his day. How did that become like that, you ask? The 20th century was the age of technological advancement. It was also the age of the Great Wars. Along with devastation and destruction, those brought some unexpected but greatly appreciated changes in our communication technology. As mentioned, intercontinental phone calls were made possible between the two great wars. After the Second World War, there was friction between the powers, which prompted everyone to invest in technology, thus giving rise to the internet in 1983. As you can imagine, the internet was quite the game changer. In 1985, a multifunctional online service was created and connected the users of desktop computers at the time. So, we went from having to rely on phones and letters to communicate to being able to instantly send emails and reach people no matter where they were. This changed not only social but professional communication. At its core, this connection was similar to our modern communication apps because it had public chat rooms, which are today's channels, private chat rooms, which we now call direct messages, and file sharing options. The 80s and 90s were a time of massive globalization in communication. It was also the time we saw the birth of the very first social media platforms. After that, it was only a matter of time before someone developed the first communication platform designed specifically for business. Lucky us. Some of you may remember this, but for those who don't, the 2010s were an eventful decade for messaging apps, especially business messaging apps. In 2010, we saw our first sophisticated apps that had many features all of us working bees needed. Of course, most weren't perfect and were missing quite a few key functionalities, like a well-organized interface or streamlined communication features. We have that today, but it took a while before the team apps really nailed it. Still, the older versions of team messaging apps had the most important things, like chats, DMs, file storage, etc. In the years to come, business messaging apps continue to thrive, which is why today we have so many functionalities at our disposal. We can connect with our coworkers or clients within a minute, communicate, and even share files with them in real time or asynchronously. In 2020, many companies introduced remote or hybrid work policies that allowed employees to work from home. So, the popularity and use of communication apps soared as everyone needed a solution that would allow them to stay in touch with their team and maintain pre-pandemic levels of productivity. Ever since we first left our mark in the history of communication by developing a top-notch team messaging app, we've been doing everything we can to ensure better, more efficient communication. Always one to build from the bottom up, Pumble first ensured its users had access to all the rudimentary features, such as channels and DMs, before enabling sophisticated functionalities like voice and video calls and screen sharing. They say you should learn history or you'll be doomed to repeat it. Here at Pumble, we take that seriously, which is why we always strive to be better. Continuous improvement of our app is our constant goal, and we're looking forward to becoming an important footnote in the history of communication. Be a part of the future. Communicate better with Pumble. Thanks for joining me on this little trip down memory lane and traveling through time with me. If you like this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and follow for more. Until next time.